a great panel of speakers. So, of course, I want to recognize and give thanks to the fact that we're meeting here virtually. I think most of us, from looking at the participation list, are in the Sea to Sky. Some are beyond. So most of us are based on the traditional, on the unceded traditional territories of the Squamish and Leeward nations, and we're grateful to do the work that we get to do here on the land that they've been stewards of for time immemorial. I'm Claire Ruddy. I'm with AWARE, which is Whistler's environmental charity, and we're really pleased to have had another opportunity to partner with Coast to Cascades Grizzly Bear Initiative tonight for a session focused specifically on grizzly bears and recreation.
As you all know, when you registered, we invited you all to ask questions, and so to submit questions to the panel, and we also invited local recreation groups to submit questions as well. And so this is going to be a really packed session because we've tried to tackle as many of your questions as we could, and we had a really wonderful response, lots of really well thought out questions, but also quite a lot of volume. So we're going to try and cover as much as we can as we get going here this evening. We do have the chat enabled. Please do feel free to pop in any technical difficulties, but as I mentioned, because we have had so many questions, we're not going to be taking questions in the chat or through a Q&A tonight. However, after the session, in the follow-up email that you get thanking you for coming, we have created a web page with a load of tools and resources, which we hope will address some of the questions that maybe we don't get to or give extra information. There's all sorts in there, from videos on how to use bear spray to research papers for if you want to dig into this in a little bit more, this topic in a little bit more detail. We'll also put we are also recording tonight's session. So we'll post that on there as well. So for tonight, I just wanted to give a quick overview of the evening. I'll introduce each of tonight's speakers in detail before each of their sections. But first, we thought it was useful to start with a little bit of, why did we want to do this topic and meet this evening? So there's a couple of whys that I pulled out just thinking about tonight. One is why grizzlies. So, we talk about grizzly bears a lot with AWARE, with the organization that I'm involved with, and all of these people who are our speakers tonight get to talk about grizzlies a lot because of what they do. But big scale, why do we talk about grizzlies? You may have been familiar with this term, umbrella species or indicator species. What we see when we have healthy grizzly bear populations on the landscape is that we have clean water, clean air, space for wildlife to roam, and those things are what many other species of wildlife need too. So when we do things that are good for grizzlies, we're not just doing it for that one species, we're doing it for many. The other piece I wanted to start us off with in terms of framing was that we're all recreationalists. I think many of us who live and choose to spend time in the Sea to Sky, we do that because we love being outside, we love getting out in nature, and we love connecting with it. Registered for this session, we have hikers, we have bikers, we have skiers, we have horse riders, motorized recreationalists from all through the Sea to Sky and from outside the Lower Mainland. And as we all know, over recent years, we've seen a marked increase in the number of users heading out to spend time in the backcountry, and even pre-COVID, a lot of new users. So related to this, we're seeing much greater user numbers on existing recreation infrastructure and more demands for new trails, back roads, campsites. We've also seen some examples of infrastructure choices that we believe now would have probably evolved differently had the needs of grizzly bears been taken into account, and that we have a chance to learn from. So there are way more details and situational nuances and knowledge that our speakers could possibly fit into the session and the time that we have today. But our hope is that this session helps to provide a resource that we can all use into the future, share with others, and together build our collective knowledge and consciousness about grizzly bears in the supportive dialogue which is already ongoing and to come into the future. So, as I said, we had such a great response with the questions for this session. We're going to try and cover off as many as we can in the time that we have. We are, of course, recording, and we will send that through as a follow-up. So in terms of what we're going to cover and who's going to take us through it this evening, We're thrilled to have Chief Ian Campbell as our first speaker, and he's going to ground us all in the Squamish Nation's long-standing relationship with the grizzly bear. Then we're going to cover off some big picture context for grizzly bears from Southwest BC with Johnny Mikes from our partner organization, Coast Cascades Grizzly Bear Initiative. Steve Rochetta is going to share some more of the status of local grizzly bears here in the Sea to Sky. Then we're going to cover off the recreation impacts, the impacts of recreation on grizzly bears with Dr. Lana Ciarniello. Melanie Percy is going to cover managing recreation and bears. And then we'll return to Lana for a final high-level piece on planning recreation infrastructure. And I will introduce everybody in full when we get to them, but that's the run of play for the evening. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Chief Ian Campbell. Chief Campbell is a hereditary chief of the Squamish Nation and is currently serving his 4th consecutive term as an elected councillor of the Squamish Nation. He has an MBA from Simon Fraser University and has been employed as a lead negotiator in the Intergovernmental Relations Department of the Squamish Nation since 1999. And we're very excited to hand over to Chief Campbell to get us rolling.
Fantastic. Thank you, Claire. It's great to have so many people join us this evening. I'm deeply honored to share some of the insights of the Squamish people when it comes to our relationship with Lathalam, with the Grizzlies. So my ancestral name is Chalip, and Chalip was one of the sons of Chatsalano, who you may recognize as Kitsalino. My chieftain name is Sukyo, and my chieftainship comes from the village of Catcolchen. I won't ask you to pronounce that, but trust me, Catcolchen is the village known as Port Mellon and the west side of Howe Sound. And yeah, I really want to recognize Johnny and Sue for the invitation, and Aware. Thank you for the work you're doing. It's good to see my friend Steve Rochetta. It's been many years, and glad to see you continuing this important work along with Lana and Melanie. I'm looking forward to hearing your presentations this evening as well. So I'm fortunate I was raised by my late grandparents, who immersed me and my sister in our language and our traditions, our culture. Always bringing us out onto the land. They were very traditional, and we went throughout the Salish Sea to visit our relatives of the Coast Salish people in ceremony and longhouses, where we witnessed a lot of spirituality and reverence in our relationship to not only grizzlies, but to all of creation. And as a young boy, you know, we'd go fishing up the Squamish River, we'd go deer hunting, and my grandfather was always warning us, beware of the bears. He'd always caution us right from a young age when we walked into the bush to show respect. And we have 2 terms for grizzly bear. One is Slathalam, which is a general term for grizzly, but the term of respect, term of endearment is Saint. And Saint is a term for older relative or older sibling. So our people consider the grizzly bear to be our older sibling that we show great respect and humility towards. And it wasn't so long ago, it was only in my grandparents' era. They grew up in the Squamish Valley in Stotmas, in the village of Stotmas. And my grandfather still pulled up the river in the canoes at that time. You know, before the Sea to Sky Highway was in, they would take the steamship up and down from North Van to Squamish to Newport. But my grandfather would always go out, and they interfaced with grizzlies all the time. Grizzlies and black bears were quite abundant back then. And, you know, as the town of Squamish and Whistler have built up, our bears have largely been displaced. And, you know, it wasn't so long ago that the grizzlies would come right down to the estuary, the Squamish River estuary, to feed annually. And we would see them at Yachleoch, which is where the Ashlew Creek confluence comes into the Squamish River. That was a real area that you can frequently see grizzlies, and we would predict where the grizzlies would be at any given time of the year in their patterns, and where the berries are, where the salmon are. So our people were quite comfortable, you know, being around grizzlies, and showed great respect. And that's something I grew up, you know, when we go camping and stuff, to make sure we don't leave our food around, that we put it all away, and just how we care for the environment and show that respect is all about preventing any sort of negative impacts and altercations with grizzlies. So I continue to mountaineer and go up into the mountains in my territory and abroad every chance I get. And I've seen many grizzlies in the high country. And we always stop and we talk to the grizzlies when we see them. We talk to them in our language. We say, "Chok mahat se anwanok squaw and kwachnomi." We always show it respect and say how great it is to see it. Anwanok squaw and chit. We have great respect for you. And we say, "An ayas chit." We come in peace. We say, "Oyamanchoch, quis etete." We say, "Please don't be alarmed. It is just us. Nech ans chalik. It is I chalik." So we introduce ourselves and we talk to the grizzly. And whenever we talk to them, they usually look at us and they're kind of blink and they're wondering if they should run or if they should stay. And we always just stop and just talk to the bears. And oftentimes the bear will just walk away, or we'll turn and walk the other way and just leave the bear at peace. So that's something I practiced my whole life whenever I see the bears. And to be candid, when I was a boy, I was quite scared to be alone in the forest, but my grandfather made me go do fasting and do my solos up in the hills, you know, often for 24 hours from daybreak right through to the next daybreak. I'd be sitting up on a mountain and I'd hear a snap in the forest at nighttime, and I'd always think, "Oh, it's a grizzly," or "Oh, it's a Sasquatch is coming to take me," right? And the sun would come up and I would realize I'm safe. You know, there's nothing out here that's going to hurt me as long as I show that caution and I'm patient and I'm not doing something silly. So, you know, that really built my confidence in the bush, where I stopped having to carry a firearm with me. The only time I take a gun is when I'm hunting. Other than that, I don't take any bear spray or guns or anything like that. I just I talk to the bears and I use awareness of what's around me at all times and hanging our food. But there are many stories of our people, you know, true stories as well as mythology that talk about the relationship to bears. And what I want to share with you is a quick story, and I know we're in the interest of time, but this is a story that was shared to us by our late elder. Laughing Bear was his name. And in '93, we went on a canoe journey to Bella Bella, Central Coast to Hilsa territory. And en route, we would stop every night and camp, and the elders would tell stories. And Laughing Bear told us a story, not to quaint in the long ago, when we could all we could all converse with the animals. He said it wasn't with our words, it was with our thoughts, with our hearts, with our actions, a non-verbal communication. He said we understood each other as all the animal people, as family. He said all the people were gathered in, it was a nice sunny day, and everyone was mending their nets and patching their canoes and procuring food and weaving baskets, doing what they needed to prepare for the long winters. But there was one young adolescent among them, and his name was Skouk. He was the Raven. And Raven's a trickster. He's always trying to cause, you know, some chaos. And he was watching the people assembled, busy working, and he started cawing. He's like, caw, caw, skawk, 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 kala, 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 kala. He's like, everybody, Mecho, gather around. He goes, we must have a competition. We must see who the strongest person amongst us is. And everyone thought, we don't have time for this, Raven. We have too much work to do. And Raven said, no. He goes, take the time to listen to the stories and see what other people have to say. So he said, we must have a competition. Let's see who the strongest is. So Saint, the grizzly bear, steps forward right away, starts growling at Raven. Raven's flapping in the breath of the big grizzly, and Grizzly turns around and shakes a tree and starts scratching his back on it. Everyone's going, wow, that grizzly bear is amazing. Has to be the strongest person amongst us. So everyone went back to what they were doing. And Raven said, no. He goes, Mechak Panitso, ka. He goes, come back. He goes, surely someone can showcase your talents. So the next person to step forward was Hwet, the little Swainson's thrush that you see hopping around in the bushes. And everyone looked at Hwet, said, what is Hwet going to do? And Hwet started singing this beautiful song. Everyone's like, wow, check out Birdie, right? And Bird starts flapping its wings way up into the sky, and then dive bombs right towards the people and flies around Grizzly Bear. Grizzly's going, trying to swat at this bear. Everyone's going, wow, check out Birdie's making bear dance, right? So everyone started relaxing and laughing, and everyone took their turns, Minchin Cho, one at a time. The Squation was next. The deer came out, started hopping and running and jumping. Everyone's like, wow, check out, deer is fast. You know, I think it's the fastest runner amongst us. And ultimately, everyone took their turn, but there was one human being standing amongst all these people, and the human was feeling very inadequate. The human had all these negative thoughts, thinking, oh, you know, maybe bear's going to bite me and kill me, or, you know, the human starting to get all these crazy thoughts, thinking, well, I can't fly. I have no idea what I'm going to do. I can't sing as good as the bird people. I can't jump as high as rabbit or run as fast as deer. And the human thought, I know what I'll do. And when no one was looking, the human reached down, grabbed his bow and arrow, and drew his arrow. And when no one was looking, he released it, and it hit that spathalum, that grizzly bear, right in the chest. The grizzly's life was taken out of him, just like that. And everyone turned around, they looked, and they seen this human standing there trembling with fear and all of these negative emotions. And everyone said, that's not courage. And they all walked away from that human being. They said, from that day forward, us as humans separated ourselves from the animal people, from that Coexistence, that ability to converse. So when we walk into that forest and a bear hears us or it smells us, it'll avoid us. The wolves will do the same thing. All the animals, the birds will fall silent, or they'll tell on us when we step into that bush, especially when they see Steve coming along, then they get really scared. But, you know, those stories are really important because they remind us of our relationship, that it's not a hierarchy of human over top, over dominating over all the other animals. It shows us as a circle that we are all in this together, and that this is the bears' homes. And unfortunately, with Western management, we've seen the decimation of so many of our populations throughout our territories, with the wild salmon stocks, with the orcas. The grizzlies once roamed all the way down through to California, is my understanding, and now this is one of the most southern boundaries of the grizzly bear. So it's unfortunate to see the human-centric management regimes that continue to marginalize and continue to alienate not only Indigenous peoples, as we've been reduced to a small pittance of our territory called reserves, comprising 0.3% of our territory. Also, it's been done to all of the animal people to make way for economy and jobs and Western management regimes that are so willing to pick up our bears and fly them hundreds of miles and relocate them somewhere, when this poor bear, this is their home and their patterns that they've used for generation after generation along these routes as they traverse from their winter hibernation to their spring feeding to their summer foraging back. Their full circle around the territory encompasses huge mountain ranges that connect us to Toba, connect us to Butte. And I understand, you know, these bears have huge territories to see them move. So I encourage you, as you listen to our speakers this evening, to really take into your heart and mind these important stories, that they're not just fables, they're not just legends, but they're teachings, there are laws, they're what we call snuayat, informing each generation of how we should conduct ourselves when we coexist with all of the other animal people. So I'm very honored to share a little bit of our teachings with you this evening through storytelling. We don't do this often enough, but modern smoke signals on this Zoom allows us to continue to share these important messages. So, you know, we've done our land use planning as Squamish Nation, Chai Tameoch. I was involved in that in 2003. We created our Kwakwayoch Cliff Ainochs, our wild spirit place conservancies. We've worked around access management, wildlife management, reintroduction of elk into the territory. So many of these important steps of collaboration and working with the province and with other stakeholders to make sure that we manage our landscapes and our relationship to all the others that call this home in a more sustainable and appropriate manner. So thank you for having me this evening. It's an honor to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Campbell. Oh, go on.
I wanted to make sure that we recognized also the important work of our relatives in the Lillooet Nation. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chief Campbell. That's a great way to start us and thinking about this as, you know, sharing teachings and not sharing enough. And so hopefully this is an evening of sharing stories and science and all of the things that are the basis to hopefully protect what we all collectively care about. So We're going to start a poll while I restart the slideshow here. So this first poll is going to pop up in front of you guys. So if you just take a moment to read through the options there, we want to know if anybody's seen a grizzly bear in the Sea to Sky backcountry. And we'll give you a couple of seconds to fill that out. And as that's happening, I'm also going to hand over, after we do this poll, to our co-presenter organization, so Coast to Cascades Grizzly Bear Initiative. I'm going to hand over to Johnny Mikas, who's their field director. And Johnny, in terms of his background, has done extensive backcountry trips in many of the more remote corners of the Coast to Cascades region for over 30 years. Johnny's guided tours in a number of Canadian premier northern wilderness areas and been provided with the privilege of encountering several hundred grizzly bears. On the ground knowledge and passion for wild places and wild animals led Johnny to be involved in the creation of several new parks and participate in land use planning processes in the Sea to Sky and northern BC. Whistler's been his home for 18 years, and he's been involved with Coast to Cascades since its inception. So Johnny's going to give us share with us the kind of broader context for this, and bring us down to the Sea to Sky scale. So Johnny, we'll just get the poll results here. Natasha, we'll close the poll so that everybody can see the results here. And Johnny, I can't see them, so they've gone from in front of me. So if you've got their answers there, pull off them.
Would you like me to read them out?
No, just which one was the most popular? Which was the way that people saw grizzly bears the most? Which ones had the most votes?
68% of the people have not seen a bear in the area.
Ooh.
There was a bear in the area, and those who had, 22% said yes to seeing a bear or bears while out hiking, biking, or horseback riding.
Great, super. Okay, I'll leave it with you.
Terrific, thanks, Claire. Good thing mine's going to be brief because I don't know how I can follow Chief Ian after a great story like that. Coast to Cascades Grizzly Bear Initiative, our interest and our purpose is to advocate for viable self-sustaining grizzly bear populations in Southwest BC. If you look at the map on the left, basically another way of saying that is that brown area, which is approximately the current range of grizzly bears on the continent. We don't want to see that bottom left corner of the brown move up to the north at all. We want to make sure that the range of grizzly bears does not contract further north into British Columbia. So this webinar really started after, over the last few years, we've seen lots of talk about grizzly bears, including, in the last year, some letters to council in the local paper, and it became clear that there wasn't a good basic level of information out there regarding grizzly bears and the effects of recreation. So we and Aware volunteered to bring tonight's real bona fide experts to provide a baseline of information. And the impetus for this was kind of Whistler related or Whistler local, but a lot of the stuff that you're going to hear tonight, I'm sure, is applicable to recreation and grizzly bears in the whole region and much farther beyond that. What we're hoping to do tonight, or what we will do tonight, is provide information that's based on science and expert opinion and not really get into a debate about conflicting values, about human values versus wildlife values. The ultimate goal for us, hopefully, would be to work more effectively with other parties, other recreationalists and others, to reduce the recreational impact on grizzly bears and other wildlife, including planning recreation infrastructure better than was done in the past. And to do that, I think we have to engage in dialogues earlier. 12 years ago, there was the major regional plan that came out for the Sea to Sky region, and that was the Sea to Sky Land and Resource Management Plan. And it included the goal of recovering grizzly bear populations so they would have long-term viability. Since then, there's been resolutions supporting grizzly bear recovery from First Nations in the region, and all the local Sea to Sky local governments have supported resolutions for recovery as well. In 2017, the Auditor General of BC did a report on grizzly bear management in the province, and her office came up with a number of recommendations. The province replied provincial government and said, we will do a grizzly bear management plan. That hasn't happened yet, hopefully this year. But they also said that we would do, the province would do area-specific management plans for grizzly bears where they were necessary. And so the map on the right there is a relatively newly released map of the population units in Southwest BC. You can see in the Vancouver Lower Mainland area in the interior there, where it's extirpated, where there's local extinction of grizzly bears. They're no longer there. And you can see these updated numbers for the risk. This is a risk level map, a concern ranking map, the different colors for the different populations. Some of you that pay attention to a lot of this, you'll notice the numbers have changed. There's going to be a link in the information that's coming out at the end of the webinar to look at that report and see why these estimates, and they're not counts, they're just estimates of the bears in the area here. The population unit that is going to be talked about probably mostly today is a Squamish-Lillooet population unit that is on the west side of Whistler. The Highway 99 forms the valley here forms the eastern boundary of that population unit. And when we look at the map grizzly bears in this part of the world have really survived by hanging on in some of the more remote valleys, like the head of some of these creek drainages in the upper Lillooet, for example, in the photo on the right. And the red is industrial development, clear cuts, logging roads, towns, other things. The yellow is the major highways. And the bluish colors are respectively rock and ice, the places the bears can't really earn a living in. And so when you look at between the human industrial pressures and locations and the rock and ice, it doesn't leave that much for grizzly bears really. And not all of that green area that remains between those other colors is actually really good habitat for them. Maybe Claire, we can flip to the next one there. These photos are courtesy of the Whistler Museum and Archives. You can see the left-hand photo is from 1918, about 100 years ago, and the right-hand one, folks figure is a fairly similar vintage. So it's been over 100 years since the first settlers, trappers, and prospectors showed up in Whistler before Whistler was even Whistler. And society no longer allows people to, well, the Grizzly Bear Hunts banned in BC, but it doesn't allow the ability for people to just wipe out 2 generations, a whole family of bears and breeding females like we see in these photos here. So we know better today than folks did then about the importance of grizzly bears in the ecosystem. But today we also know about, sorry, Claire. Today we also know about what are the things that we need to be focused on these days, and that could be too many roads, highways that block linkages between the populations of grizzly bears, and high levels of recreation. If collectively we're willing to plan and scale back on building every trail that we dream about or every hut that we envision being somewhere, then grizzly bears and other wildlife are going to be in big trouble if we insist on access to everywhere by any means, any time. On the other hand, if we're each willing to give up a little bit in terms of our favorite types of recreation, and we give time and space to grizzly bears to survive in their important habitats, then we can have grizzly bears in the landscape and be partners in this, rather than bogging down in struggles over the human desires versus the well-being of wildlife. So thanks to all the speakers who have joined us tonight, and I pass it on to you again, Claire.
Thank you, Johnny, for that whistle-stop tour of Southwest BC corner and the challenges that we don't necessarily see when we look at some of these big maps. So we're going to launch our second poll for the evening. So Natasha, I'm going to let you do that. So this is around which of the following incidents do you think have really happened in the last few years relating to grizzly bears. And while you guys are doing that, I'm going to introduce our next speaker, who is Steve Rochetta. So Steve is an ecosystem biologist with the Ministry of Forest Lands and Natural Resources out of the Squamish office. He's been researching grizzly bears here in the Sea to Sky for decades. From collaring to helicopter relocations to tracking, Steve's done it all. And he has the photos to prove it. Steve knows the region's grizzly bears by name and is the foremost contact in understanding the impacts of development proposals on local bears. So before we jump into Steve, we will close this poll and see which ones people voted for. And we can see here that we've got most of these got votes. So the lowest vote was the peak-to-peak gondola, which, you know, we have to throw in a wild card every time, but all of these other ones have happened. So you know, there's a variety of ways that we interact with, that bears interact with our communities, and this shows the variety from apples to full berry habitat to mountain bikers on trails. So there's lots of ways that we need to figure out and learn how to manage interactions with bears. So Steve is going to be taking us through what that looks like here in the with local bears and some of the dynamics that we have with our local bear populations. Over to you, Steve.
Thanks, Claire. Thanks everybody for tuning in. I don't know if I can live up to that explanation of who I am and what I did, but I'll try. And I want to thank Chief Campbell for his insight. Fantastic as usual, my friend. I've been asked to address certain questions and then get along into the history of bears in the area. So I'll just go right into it here. I've been asked what agency is responsible for the management of grizzly bears in this area and in BC, and that's quite a simple explanation. There are two government agencies that are responsible: my ministry, the Forest, Lands and Natural Resource Ministry, and then the Ministry of Environment, which houses the Conservation Officer Service. And then obviously in cooperation with our First Nations partners now, we're managing the landscape on a government-to-government basis with them. I also wanted to address the trails issue west of Whistler, because it's one of the areas that is the most concern, and I want to try and clear up some ideas on just how these things are approved and who does the approval. The area west of Whistler is Crown land, so it's managed by the government partners. In the case of these trails, RMOW would apply to the government for an application of referral, telling us what the trails are, what they plan to do. And our Trails and Rec group would take that and send it out for comment. At the time of these trails, it probably would have gone to First Nations for consultation. They would not have been as a partner at the time, a government-to-government partner, because it goes back a ways. And it would also go to my branch, the resource management branch, or to me for comments around biology, either species of concern and habitat concerns. And if everything was aligned and the Trails and Rec people found it fit, they would authorize the trails, setting a set of conditions in the authorization, including location of trail, length of trail, size of trail, type of use, seasonality. They could put anything in there. And then the resort, in this case, the resort municipality would be responsible for managing the trails to the standards in the authorization and dealing with keeping the public safe. In the case of interactions with grizzly bears, like we've had in the past few years, decisions are made regarding basically human and bear safety. The Conservation Officer Service comes in, they regulate use, so they regulate safety under the Wildlife Act. There would be a consultation between the Conservation Officer Service, myself, and other members of the government. We would decide what the course of action should be taken if there is a situation where you've got grizzly bears using habitat and a possible conflict with humans. And so in that case, we almost always err on the side of safety for bears and safety for humans. We're not going to take a chance on losing a bear in a recovery situation or putting a human's life in danger. And the COS is pretty adamant that we will err on the side of safety, and I am too. So the next question was sort of summarizing the history of bears in this area. To try and take 25 years of work and summarize it into a few minutes is going to be kind of difficult, but I'll try as best I can. In the mid-90s, it was popularly thought that grizzly bear numbers had dropped to a point where there were very few around here. We had questions inside the government and outside the government regarding population distribution of grizzly bears and what the population estimates actually were in all the grizzly bear population units that overlap this region. we had discussions internally and externally with private partners on how we would try to assess this issue. And starting in 2004, in consultation with Aspen Wildlife Consulting out of Alberta, we came up with a plan to do a regional DNA study, which would be largely all of the South Coast region and portions of the adjacent regions, because bears don't always adhere to lines. And what we basically found was that our assumptions on the populations were wrong. Some populations were doing far better than we thought they were. Some were doing far worse than we thought they were. But specific to this area, it's a DNA-based hair snag study. So what we did was we collected, you can see there's a large male in the picture to the left. He's at one of my monitoring sites in Roe Creek, which is inside this area. They are attracted to a site and they leave a sample of hair, and from that sample of hair I can determine species, sex, individuality, and then we can start tracing the how bears are using the landscape, and also whether or not they're persisting, and we can also monitor sows and cubs, like the pictures in the middle of that screen or on the right of my screen. That's the same location with 2 sets of females, 2 sets of different 2-year-olds in the same year, and I can monitor that. From the DNA study, we found that what had happened was the populations had dropped so low in this area, and largely become from persecution by every sector, as Johnny showed. They were shot for fun, they were shot for sport, they were shot because they were a nuisance, they were shot because they thought they were dangerous. And what our DNA work actually showed was that there were surviving isolated populations of grizzly bears that were genetically unique, and they'd probably been isolated for 60 to 80 years. And we were just seeing that some of our units were reconnecting now. We stopped shooting bears. Mentality has changed a little bit on how we manage grizzly bears. They're not thought of as a danger all the time. They weren't shot willy-nilly just because they were there, and populations started to grow. So we're seeing a genetic reconnection in the South Chilcotin, Toba Butte, and Squamish Lillooet unit, but we're also seeing a fairly significant isolation in the Garibaldi Pit, Stein to Hatlatch, and North Cascades units. And the map's not up, but that was in the original map that Johnny showed. Specific to this area is this area west of Whistler is the Squamish Lillooet unit. The map there shows 46 animals. Our original estimate in 2004 was 59 animals. I am not totally sure how the recalculation has been done. And I think it's probably not accurate because it's moving in time. Our assessment, based on the work we're doing now, is that the South Chilcotin range and the Squamish Lillooet range are likely growing at 2 to 6% per year. And that's bared out by my current trend monitoring analysis study, which is also DNA based. And, but the original study in 2004, when we did DNA, showed 2 females and 3 males west of Whistler, with the drainages to the north of that, the Ryan River, having 17 females and 7 males. So as we've gone through time, we've watched these specific females subsist on the landscape and their offspring grow to be old enough to have offspring and then have a second set of offspring. I'm now 4 or 5 generations down the line with some of these bears, and we can see the areas that they're using. It's an incredible picture, and it fascinated the geneticist that we use, because we're actually watching in time a reconnection of grizzly bears on the landscape. Johnny showed that grizzly bear ranges are shrinking in BC. They're shrinking probably all over the world, and we're trying to hold the line in southwestern BC as it goes right now. There are so much more that I can talk about regarding the work that's been done, but I think I'll skip to a second set of the work that was generated out of the initial work, the initial DNA work. We started a collaring study in 2007, and the initiative behind the collaring study was to try to determine what habitat these grizzly bears were using and how they were moving about between habitats, selecting different habitats. And as time went on, because of major projects that were proposed in the area, we were also trying to determine how these bears moved about in relation to human activities. And we're still in a phase where we're ongoing in that. And the collaring study is trickling along. It still is there. I have one bear collared right now that I can find and one bear that I can't. Callie is the original collared bear. We collared her in 2007, and she is still collared. She's 21 years old, and I know 3 or 4 generations of cubs of hers that are now present on the landscape, and several female cubs of hers that are having cubs, and their cubs are having cubs. If Claire could go back to that map with all the little dots on it, that is a representation of a collar period. That's a bear named Chloe, who is actually Callie's sister, who are daughters of a bear I collared in the Rutherford named Power. Power was an original matriarch of this area, and both of her females, Callie and Chloe, have had female cubs that have had female cubs that have had female cubs, and Callie dropped out of the DNA grid 3 or 4 years ago when she was 17, which probably means she's dead for some reason. I'm not sure. She used to spend quite a bit of time in Rutherford Creek in the spring, and she may have been shot. But when they drop out, they're gone. Callie is currently denned on the Callahan side of that map you can see right there, close to the Upper Squamish. Our collaring study has highlighted a lot of things that we didn't actually know. And it's hard to touch them all very quickly, but you can see the data points in and around west of Whistler on Rainbow Mountain there. There's several den sites, there's a lot of different habitats, and you can also see, if you look closely near the bottom, down towards the Whistler, the town of Whistler, there's a cluster of points, yeah, right where that is. That is a spring slide track that has Heraculum cow parsnip on it. And we would never have known about that area without the collar data, because we've had 3 different bears that in this area that spend the early spring there. You see that's a March timing, March 28th. And it's one of the only areas where Heraculum is available. What happens when bears come out of the den, their habitat selection is fairly simple. They come out of the den, it's snowy, they haven't got many options, they've got to start eating food. There's no really high value fat foods available. They go for succulents, basically greens. So they go down the hill to the floodplains, they find either wet areas that have succulents, including grasses, sedges, cow parsnip, something that they can eat that has protein in it. It won't put fat on, but it keeps them alive. And then as the snow proceeds up the hillside, they move up the hill on succulents until such time as the berry season comes about, either in mid to late summer, all the way into fall, September and October. And that's where they put on their weight. There are other high value food groups in this area that bears could access. They could access marmots, they could access pine nuts, but they don't. These bears subsist, in the west of Whistler, subsist basically on huckleberries. They don't go to salmon, even though salmon are available in the Squamish system. None of these bears that I studied go to salmon. They basically eat huckleberries. So the collar data showed us not only that there was a lot of high value huckleberry habitat in the high alpine, but how valuable it was. I think we underestimated at the start how valuable and how important the habitat was at the high elevation. But the collar data started to show us, okay, as soon as late August and September show up, all of our bears that were collared went into this subalpine zone. And then when we went there, it was easy to find out why. There's both black huckleberry, Vaccinium membraceum, and Cascadia huckleberry, which is a ground-based blueberry. And both are very sweet and high value, and these bears target them, and they can eat them all the way into the fall, very late until the snow flies. And that became the precipitous for the importance of this area. At the time of the trail issue, we weren't aware of how important the habitat was. We knew that there was some importance of the habitat, but we did not know the significance of the habitat. The whole subalpine area in the coast is huckleberries, but not all huckleberry habitat is good huckleberry habitat. Some has huckleberries, but it doesn't produce berries, and some produces berries every year, and then it changes from year to year based on the characteristics of the spring and summer. And what came to highlight in the study, the portions of the study we've done, is how important the area west of Whistler was. and the population's growing, and as it grows, it's accessing this high value food area. I'm going to quickly skip past the rest of the habitat stuff and talk about why we're recovering grizzly bears in this area. Now, first of all, it's a provincial mandate to recover bears. It's a federal mandate to recover bears. We have a land and resource management plan, as Johnny described, that has a unanimous support from all sectors, including the municipality of Whistler and all the recreational users, including motorized, and unanimously supporting bear recovery. And on a note, my own, I would say it's just the right thing to do. BC is not BC without apex predators, and grizzly bear is the #1 apex predator. If we don't have it, then we lose something. There was a question that came up, why don't we collar all the grizzly bears? It's a simple answer. First of all, growing population, you can't find them that easily. They're not that easy to collar. We have collared 60 bears over a 20-year period. It's impossible to collar them all. It's ethically not correct to collar them all. We collar bears in response to research questions. It's a fairly intrusive process for a bear and for a human. And then the third element of that is it's just way too expensive. Would I like to have more bears collared in west of Whistler? I sure would. I'd like to have a subsample of females collared so that I could understand how the population is growing and what the recreational and other impacts are doing to them. It's just a matter of money, and we just don't have any money at this time. There's one other thing that I wanted to touch on. I was asked what I thought the population trend was. I know what the population trend is. The population trend in the South Chilcotin and the Squamish-Lillooet units are the population's growing. Our camera data, trend analysis data, and DNA data is pointing at not only increase, but a relatively fast increase. We have good habitat, and the bears are utilizing it. They're growing at a tremendous rate, and I think probably we're going to see the potential for more interactions with humans. I was also asked a question about the young bear that showed up in Whistler this year in the spring. She showed up there one time. My assessment on that would be, and I know this bear because I've watched it at the Callahan Olympic site for the last 3 years. It shows up at the same time and eats grass. And then my assessment for this spring was that it was a very cold spring and the snow persisted, and this bear probably kept going downhill till it found the River of Golden Dreams and the wetland there, and there was likely a large amount of food. And because of COVID, there wasn't a large number of people on the landscape, and it wandered into a human habitation area. From the pictures I saw, she's running, and it was the only encounter we had. She never came back. So I think it's a one-time event, although I do expect to see grizzly bears show up in Whistler. I do expect to see grizzly bears show up in Squamish as they have been. They're utilizing the habitat that's available and doing what they do. It's up to us to figure out how we react to what they do.
And that's a great segue, Steve, into Lana. Thank you. So Lana's going to talk a little bit about how it's up to us to manage what we do, and she's going to jump into the impacts of recreation on grizzly bears. So I'm just going to get Natasha to pull up the next poll here to launch us into that conversation. So which of the following backcountry activities do you think could have an adverse impact on grizzly bears, and just select all that apply there. While you're doing that, I'll just give you the background on Lana. So Dr. Lana Ciarniello is a registered professional biologist and an independent research scientist and co-chair of the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, the IUCN Bear Specialist Group's Human Bear Conflict Expert Team. Lana's previous projects have included radio collaring bears to track their use of habitats, survival and reproduction, and using non-invasive data gathering methods to monitor the effects of bear viewing tourism on bears. Lana believes in science-based management of bears. She uses temporal and spatial modeling to seek to explain urban encroachment into bear habitat, natural food shortages, and human bear conflicts in relation to both grizzly and black bears. So we will just close out our poll here. And we can tell you that the answer was all of them. So it was a trick question. So we'll close that out with the exception, unless it's really smelly, of the smell of hikers' unwashed polypropylene, but we you know, maybe if it's really bad. So Lana, to delve into that a little bit more and give us more information on how recreation can impact bears, over to you.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you for asking me to speak today, and thank you to all the speakers before. They were really great. It was really interesting listening to everybody. So I've been asked today to talk about the effects of backcountry recreation on grizzly bears, and when I do that, they also wanted me to put in some seasonal recreation and talk about how recreational activities compare with each other. So I think Steve offered a great segue into this when we talk about habitat selection. If grizzly bears are present and grizzly bears are beginning to expand on the land base, that means we've done something right. We have for them secure habitats. So places where they feel secure and there's not a lot of human presence in there. We have a good natural food base, and we have good denning habitat where they can spend the winter. Those are sort of all our bottom-up processes. And from our top down, we're controlling really that mortality on them, that excessive mortality like you saw back in the historical pictures in Whistler. So that's going really well, and we're doing something there. But grizzly bears, they like this unroaded, unfragmented habitat. So when I think of them in comparison with black bears, I think of black bears as more your coyote species that are more sort of around and on the edge, and grizzly bears are more your true wilderness species. They prefer these less people. So in regards to recreation, how does that all come together? The bear's biology with recreation. Okay, well, we have three main issues with recreation. We can get excessive energy output from the bears, displacement from the bears from habitat types, and increased mortality or increased risk of mortality to the bears. So on a broad scale, I just want to go over, what does that mean? What is excess energy output for a bear mean? Okay, well, so if they're fleeing from disturbance, say on a trail, they're using extra energy. I mean, why do we want to go out and burn calories? To lose weight, right? So a bear is going to do that if they have to disturb from an area, or they could leave that area entirely, forcing them to use lower quality habitat. They're in that area because they want to use that habitat. So that could force them to leave using lower quality habitat, thereby also getting less energy. Why is this so important to bears? Let's tie it back to those females that Steve was talking about before. If you listen to our other webinar we gave on sort of more bear biology, females are the reproductive engine of this grizzly bear population, and we want them to be fat. Bears want to be fat, you know. They really want to have that extra weight on so that they can have all those cubs and implant when they're in the den during a very stressful period. If they're putting out this excessive energy, they don't have that. And our populations can't do this nice growing and expanding and watching them go out. Okay? So we don't want that excessive energy output. We want them to have access to their habitats. So let's talk a little quickly here about displacement. What does that mean? That means they're leaving their preferred or their prime habitat type for one that is lesser quality, okay, maybe of lesser quality. What does this do for them? It causes stress. Stress is another one that, again, less energy coming in, more energy coming out, okay? So they're expending energy again. It's going into that energy output. So how does this tie into increased mortality risk? It can tie into increased mortality risk simply from not being able to gain enough nutrition. So when they go into their den, don't forget, they're spending 5 or 6 months, they're not eating, they're not urinating, and they're not defecating. And our pregnant females have the added extra stress of they're actually going through gestation, birth, and lactation. They're feeding their babies. So we really want to get these growing populations, these threatened populations, back up these secure habitats. Let's talk about what do bears do here around us, okay? Bears tend to be, they're active in the dawn and they're active in the dusk. Okay, so they do that. And one of the reasons that we believe behind that as researchers is to avoid humans, is to have this time where it's sort of the bear's time out there, right? So that tends to be in your dawn and dusk periods where they're more active. What we've seen, one of the things that we should bring up here with COVID and recently this weird year we had in 2020, a lot more people getting out, a lot more people wanting to hit those trails. And what we're seeing when hitting those trails sometimes is that people are trying to space themselves out to avoid other people. And so they're seeing more recreation in these early morning periods, these dawn periods, and in these dusk periods. Okay, bears, they like predictability. They want us to be predictable, right? And they can try to move around us. We can try, they're trying to coexist with us, and they can move around us. When we remove that predictability from the equation, from the situation for them, it gets even more stressful. Displacement gets even higher. So there's things that bears are trying to do to work with us and to live with us. And there's things that we can do to help them do that, to work with them and live with them and be productive, okay? So let me just take a look at my notes here. I think that's all I wanted to say there. Okay, so my next question was, does all recreation have the same effect on bears? Okay, so, and the answer to that is no. What's interesting is there was a survey done, and recreationalists, they actually blame other recreationalists that do different recreation for having an effect on bears, but their recreation doesn't necessarily. So that's kind of an interesting result. That's not true. All recreation poses a risk, okay, to wildlife. Why? Why does all recreation? Through actual displacement, okay? So from moving them off the land base, increased disturbance on the land base, okay? And degradation of habitat. Remember, they like these pristine habitats. So when we degrade them through recreational activities, that doesn't help the bear. But now let's bring that question another level down. What has the highest risk to bears and why? Okay, so what I did to answer this question that was given me is I took a look at recreation, and I took a look at what kind of recreation do we have. Well, I'm just going to give you some, and I'm probably going to miss some, so don't worry about it. But we've got motorized recreation such as snowmobiles, ATVs, and now e-bikes, right? And then we've got fast downhill recreation such as mountain biking, cycling. We've got hiking. We have backcountry horseback riding. I'm a huge equestrian, by the way. And we also have a new thing, all these heli things going on, heli biking. And through this process, I found out that there's heli yoga. So there's all these recreation. Let's take these and let's break them into high-speed recreational activities. Let's take a look at high speed first, okay? And then when within high speed, we have motorized, so making noise, noisy, and not noisy, okay? So noisy, snowmobiles. Okay, so one of the questions was to look at seasonality. Let's take snowmobiles are an excellent example. It's winter, the bear is denning, they're up in the alpine. Okay, a snowmobile comes up. It's very loud and noisy. Okay, now where is that bear going to flee to? Because it's in the middle of winter. It's not eating, it's not urinating, it's not defecating, and it needs every little bit of energy and fat it has to maintain it through that winter time. So, and to come out in a nice condition, where's it fleeing to? Where's the next den site it's going to go to, right? And how can it dig if it's going to dig a den in frozen environment? So these can have really, really negative impacts on wildlife when we look at it that way. So these recreational activities, these noisy recreational activities can have these big displacement impacts on them. So let's take a look at, high speed, low speed, so I did that. Okay, let's take a look at this motorized versus non-motorized, and then let's take a look at high speed activities first. So let's take a look at mountain biking. Here's an excellent one. So it is a quiet activity, but it's a very high speed activity. And when you are mountain biking, what do you have to do, right? Well, you don't want to fall off and you don't want to hit a tree and you don't want to really hurt yourself. So you are focused. You're focused on your track. You're focused on looking down. You're high speed and you're quiet. If you have ever taken a bear awareness course in your life, you will know that these are the exact things that we tell you not to do, right? We want you to be aware in bear country, to make noise, to be aware of your surroundings and consider your surroundings. And why is this? Because all of these high speed activities limit the reaction time that bears have to respond to us. So we actually have some really excellent studies on bears where they put GPS collars on bears and they put GPS receivers on recreationalists going into an area. They did this in Yellowstone National Park, if anybody wants to look it up. And it was so neat, because if the bears are aware and the people are making a lot of noise and going slowly, the bear could kind of move off the track and the people go by, they'd be completely unaware that that bear was there. But you factor in high speeds, not paying attention to your environment, concentrating on a track and not making noise, and you can come up with a dangerous situation. We've had it happen before where a mountain biker has T-boned a bear in that, and then the bear responded by mauling, and unfortunately the person did not survive. Okay, so these are the kind of things we want to look at. We want to break our recreation types down. This is a fun fact for you. Do you know that if you are a biker going uphill, paying attention to your surroundings, so going slowly, you have no greater chance of getting into a conflict with a grizzly bear than a hiker who's also making noise. So it's really this high speed focusing on our track activity, okay? Whereas the noise one, that gets you into that displacement where they're moving them off and expending tons of energy too. All right, so I think we answered that. I've got to look at what my next question is because I didn't memorize them all. Oh, earbuds. That's one thing I wanted to bring up. So a lot of people are recreating these days with earbuds in their ear, and that takes away another sensory one we have. Okay, bears, they're, like I said, a lot of times they're going to try to work with us, and they're going to give us warning signs, and we're going to hear something like, hoo, 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 like, you know, get out of here, back off. I'm going to be coming up ahead, right? If you can't hear those warning signs, you can't do your half of the equation to help that bear out, right? So there's two parties here, and we both got to do our job together on how to do this and how to coexist if that's what we want to do. So we've talked about the high speed quiet movement and the focus on the track. And we've talked about hikers and bikers. Oh, the next one they wanted me to touch briefly on was dogs. Dogs in grizzly bear country. Okay, dogs in grizzly bear country are not a good idea. So there's just really no other way to say that. There's a lot of places like Denali National Park where your dog is not allowed into the alpine and it has to stay on a leash, and you're not even allowed to leave your dog alone in the campsite. This is because of the negative impacts it can have on bears, and also because of the negative impacts it can have on people. So what negative impact on people? Well, a lot of times that dog isn't we're not talking about bear dogs here, because there are fully trained bear dogs that can be great in other situations. We're talking about just people going out and hiking with their dogs. So now you've got your dog off leash, let's say, and it's running ahead. It comes across and finds a bear. It starts to go into a confrontation with that bear. Bears aren't necessarily afraid of dogs, not at all. And some dogs, you know, some bears may look at it as like a little Scooby snap. So when they go to chase that bear back, where does that dog run? Well, it flees back to its owner. That's its comfort. And it tends to stand right between that owner's legs. And now we've got a negative human-bear conflict, human-bear-dog conflict. This is something we're just starting to explore the numbers of with grizzly bears, so I don't have them, but I do from Steve Herrero, who is my mentor and colleague and has done a lot of this work. He looked at black bear incidents with dogs, off-leash dogs and black bear incidents. This is from 2010 to 2013. There were 93 incidents. 91% of those were female grizzly bears with dogs off leash. So the hiker had gone out, the dog and then had brought it back. So female grizzly, 91%. So dogs must be kept on a leash. If you're in bear country, I think it's our responsibility, especially for the bears, to keep a dog on the leash. There are quite a few reports where bears attacks have been instigated by dogs being off leash, but there are very few reports of dogs actually saving the human. So it's unlikely to happen. Usually it's the owner that has to save the dog. Okay, so moving along here, my next question was, is there a cumulative effect of increasing recreation? And yeah, there is a cumulative effect. And let's bring this back to the biology again, and Steve talked about those females, and we talked about how important those females are to our population. What females tend to do in bear biology is you have a matriarch, and now she's going to have babies, and her female offspring are allowed to have part of her home range, whereas her males have to disperse. It goes for genetic inbreeding, they get kicked out. but the females are allowed to have part, and that kind of rings out like this matriarch, right? So you have these core security areas where that's ringing out. When we start to increase trails too much, we start to increase into those core security areas, and we start to take away that habitat for them, right? And that can be a really big problem. It leads to more habitat loss and more habitat degradation. And that can hold our numbers down. We want those females to be able to breed. We want those dispersers to come out because those are the ones that are allowing our populations to grow. And we're trying to grow these threatened populations. That's what we're doing. So let's see. I think, am I done my questions? Oh, no. Okay. So, and then the last one I have here is that they want me to look at coexistence and with regard to grizzly bears management, what that might look like, okay, or what grizzly bears are doing. So I think what I did instead is just sort of intersperse that all the way throughout this talk. But what that looks like in coexistence is these bears are trying to get along with us, like I said, and these dispersers that are coming out of these areas, they're like our core areas where bears are, and they're coming in, okay? They have a high mortality rate. So what we don't want to do is we don't want to disrupt these core areas because they actually feed into our populations and are what gives us these bears in these areas. And so that's really important for coexistence and where we are and these thresholds of use. And I think that leads to all my questions answered.
Certainly does. Thank you, Lana. And good segue into Melanie's part of the evening. So just as we have with the other speakers, we're going to start with a poll. So this one's about if you could only pick one of the following to take with you into Backcountry, which one would it be? And while you're doing that, I'll give you the overview of Melanie's background. So Melanie has worked in the field of conservation biology for over 25 years, including working with national parks, provincial parks in Alberta and BC, NGOs, and for industry. Melanie began working with bears in 1989 in the Canadian Rockies, studying the spatio-temporal movement patterns of grizzly bears and black bears in developing areas of Banff National Park. She then worked as a senior park ecologist in Kananaskis Country, Alberta. Melanie now works as a protected areas applied ecologist for BC Parks in Victoria and is a member of the Southwest BC Grizzly Bear Recovery Working Group. Melanie is passionate about managing protected landscapes for human-wildlife coexistence, particularly in regards to large predators, including bears and wolves. So Melanie, thank you for joining us. We will close this poll. And I can't see the answers, but I can tell you that you need to carry your bear spray and know how to use it. And but there was lots of options there that were kind of random tweaks on that. But Melanie, would you say that's the number one?
Absolutely, yes. And thank you so much for that. And thanks, of course, to all of our amazing speakers so far. I was kind of sitting back enjoying it and forgetting for a while that I had to do my part too. But so yes, absolutely. Bear spray is your best defense. It's backed by science. Essentially, your bear spray creates a wall of deterrent between you and the bear. Super important, carry it on you. So either on the shoulder strap of your pack or on your hip belt. And practice drawing it like you're a gunslinger, you know, make it a reflexive action to grab it whenever you hear like a snap in the forest. You need to know what you're doing, and everyone in your party should have it. And you know, it's more effective than air horns. They can aggravate a bear encounter. In terms of auditory deterrence, the human voice would be the best deterrent. Air horns are annoying to other animals and to people as well. Bear bangers, I know a lot of people carry them. Bangers are more of a hazing tool, and they can provoke an attack if bear behavior is misinterpreted by the person using the banger. You can also flush the bear down the trail into an oncoming party. So absolutely number one is your bear spray, and again, knowing how to use it. So I had a bunch of questions, and a lot of them revolve around what other agencies do to manage human grizzly bear interactions in recreational settings. So such as national parks and provincial parks. So yeah, what do other agencies do? So first of all, I'll just frame it. Grizzly bears are really an indicator of ecosystem health. And more agencies are realizing that if we focus on the management of the landscape and on managing people and human use, these proactive management strategies really lessen the need for hands-on bear management. And that's where most agencies are going to these days, especially protected area agencies. So there's a number of different tools that can be used by agencies to manage human grizzly bear interactions and human grizzly bear coexistence. The first are kind of planning related. This includes mindful planning of facilities, so trails and campgrounds, picnic areas, doing, for example, the BC Parks Human Bear Conflict Prevention Plan talks about the need to do bear hazard assessments before facilities go into parks. There's also, protection of wildlife movement corridors, and knowing that we don't want to put facilities going through these really critical grizzly bear corridors, as well as grizzly bear habitat patches that are really critical to bears. Some of the other things that agencies are doing, they're actually relocating facilities that are either have historically been in places that we now realize are bad, or even newer ones. I've heard recently of some trails that are being removed because after the fact, we're realizing that where the trails are leading people into conflict with bears. Getting rid of pirate trails, or these sort of illegal trails, unsanctioned trails off the landscape, is another strategy as well under that planning related umbrella. Another tool is managing attractants. So these are unnatural attractants, so foods that people bring into grizzly bear habitat. So in campgrounds and picnic sites, there's some phenomenal work being done by BC WildSafe, the bear campsite program. There's also bear lockers being put into backcountry camping facilities. And of course, everyone's familiar, or most people are familiar with bear bins. So that unnatural attractant management, the garbage and the human food, is super important. Also management of natural attractants. So we know that when we clear a forest and put in a big campground, the sunlight hits the forest floor, you get all kinds of amazing berry bushes coming in, and those over time need to be managed as well. So cutting back those attractants for bears in the campgrounds. So another section of tools that management agencies can take is all about human use management. So things like bear warnings, posting warnings so that people can make informed decisions as to where bears have been seen or where there may have been encounters. Bear closures as well, and these can either be sort of predictable closures that are year by year, and you know that you're always going to have the same area closed, or they can be reactive to an encounter or an event, or where grizzly bears might be. And I'm going to go into that in a little bit more detail in just a moment. But there's also access restrictions. So the prohibition of certain activities, and it could be mountain biking or hiking with your dogs, or outside of national parks would be like motorized recreation. And some of these restrictions can also include things like carrying bear spray is mandatory, or you have to be in a group size of a certain number or over. So for example, 4 hikers is 4 hikers or 2 equestrians. That's a very common one for national parks for grizzly bear access restrictions. And these restrictions come with some pretty hefty fines too. Under the National Parks Act regulations, you can be fined up to $25,000 for not failing to comply with some of these access restrictions. So these are some other tools. Then there's the actual bear management as well, which would include things like electric fencing around campgrounds, also hazing and aversive conditioning. So hazing is essentially just an application of unpleasant stimuli to get a bear to do what you want it to do, which is usually leaving an area. These are temporary random measures, so things like bear bangers or cracker shells or rubber bullets. aversive conditioning is that's more of a structured program. So we kind of consider it almost to be like a higher education for bears, and they wear a radio collar or an ear tag transmitter, and then they get into this program where they're being conditioned more consistently. And this is often used where bears are quite comfortable being around people, and we just want to make sure that they stay out of campgrounds and away from roadsides to keep them safe as well as people safe. So another area of effort for other agencies in terms of minimizing human grizzly bear conflict would be public education. And that's really essential in minimizing the impacts of recreation on bears. So everything from signage, all kinds of great online or hard copy information, special bear events that are hosted by government or NGOs or First Nations. There's kids programs as well. In the national parks, they have a bear guardian program. So when tourists and visitors are stopped at a roadside, what we call a bear jam, the guardians will actually talk to people and educate them about bears. In the Bow Valley of Alberta, they have a wildlife ambassador program, which is more trails oriented. So they have a number of volunteers going out on the trails and speaking with hikers and bikers and dog walkers about the importance of carrying bear spray and the importance of not wearing your earbuds. So you know, with your earbuds, you can't hear anything that's going on around you, and keeping your dog on a leash, all those sort of things. So, you know, public education is, again, it's essential, and we're so fortunate to be able to recreate in grizzly bear habitat. And all that's asked of us is to educate ourselves and treat bears with respect. We had a question specifically about what other agencies or what are some of the reasons that other agencies might close a trail or an area for grizzly bears. And as I mentioned before, so closures can be predictable. So if we know through data and through past encounters that bears are in certain areas year after year after year, we can put closures that people can anticipate, that there'll be annual closures. So for example, specific trails or alpine meadows or, you know, the Liard Hot Springs, certain areas of that park are closed on an annual basis. Same with Kokanee Glacier Provincial Park. So it's these are more predictable closures that are implemented year after year. But the closures can also be reactive to protect certain bears at certain times of the year, or if a bear is in the area. So for example, a female grizzly bear with young. There was an example I can remember where an entire bench in the Canmore area was closed for about 2 weeks to protect a female with young of the year. Also, you may have seen in the news recently about a ski touring area on Bow Summit between Banff and Jasper has been closed to ski touring to protect a denning bear. And that's another great example of a reactive closure. And I just want to stress that area closures keep bears and people safe. And again, it's the small price we have to pay for the privilege of recreating in bear habitat. And we need to stress that we have a choice as to whether we go out into the backcountry or not. We have lots of other places to go. Bears don't. They don't have a choice. They need to be there. Okay, I had another question on why not just haze grizzly bears, including with helicopters, or move them like we do with problem black bears. So the short answer is because grizzly bears in their habitat, eating natural forage within their home range is not a problem. There's no reason to move them. To the best of my knowledge, no agency uses hazing with helicopters as a management strategy to allow for human recreation. It's dangerous for bears and humans, costly, unnecessary, especially when we know that if we adopt measures to alter human behavior and improve awareness, we don't need strategies like that. And you know, when it comes to moving a bear, yes, once in a while it is done. But it's considered an absolute last resort. Doing so puts the bear at risk It stresses the population that the bear is going into, and it has major implications for bears in the existing population. And Lana talked a bit about that, you know, the matriarchal structure. And so we want to keep bears on the ground in their natal home ranges. Another question, what group size is recommended for bear safety? So when national parks first started implementing group size restrictions, 6 used to be the standard. 4 has become the new standard in national parks. And I think that's mostly because you're more likely to get compliance with requiring people to be in a group of 4 as opposed to 6. It's easier to get 3 buddies to go hiking with you as opposed to 5. And 4 is considered the new standard, particularly, or I suppose based on the idea, based on the premise that people are doing the right thing. They're making noise, they're carrying bear spray. If they have dogs, they're on the leash. Often places with access restrictions, actually you can't have dogs in any way. But anyway, 4 is considered the new standard. But really, at the end of the day, the more people, you know, strength in numbers, right? The more you have, the safer you are. It's important to mention that this is a tight group of 4 people. So, and they recommend that, or they reckon that a tight group happens when the person at the front of the party can converse easily with the person in the back of the party without having to scream. So it's not like you can hook up with 2 other people at the trailhead and then that you and your buddy can hook up with 2 other people at the trailhead and then disperse into 2 groups of 2 100 meters down the trail. Like, you have to stay together. And remember, this is 4 humans, not 2 humans and 2 dogs. And again, like with other access restrictions and closures, it's for everybody's safety, the bears and people. And my final question is, what do recent grizzly bear encounters tell us? And Steve touched a bit on this, as did Lana. More people are recreating grizzly bear habitat now. So we know there's going to be more encounters. And we know that people who are prepared with bear spray, with knowledge of bear behavior, and are making noise, not wearing earbuds, again, no earbuds, they're less likely to have a negative encounter. So it comes down to people doing the right thing. We need to give grizzly bears their space. We can't expect to go everywhere we want all the time. You know, we're visitors in their homes, and so incredibly privileged to be able to recreate in grizzly bear country. And again, all that's asked of us is that we educate ourselves and conduct our activities with respect and consideration. So that's it for my questions, and back to Claire.
Thank you, Melanie. That was great. Lots of food for thought in there to think about as individuals, what we can do each and every time we head out. I just want to recognize that we are coming up on time, but we've got one more component, which is Lana's going to take us through the big picture planning piece, about 10 minutes. So if you can stick on, please do. As a reminder, we are recording the session, so if you can't, you can watch the last few minutes over a cup of tea tomorrow or coffee. Lana, we'll jump over to you for the last part of the evening. So talking about this kind of broader scale planning piece, we had obviously, you know, I think a lot of people on the call will be familiar with the context of the trails on the west side of the valley, and you were very involved in that in the end in terms of trying to get the bear management piece pulled together, and there was a lot of lessons learned from that. So obviously, if we're thinking about what people on this can take away, lessons learned that we can apply to other areas in the Sea to Sky, really excited to have you wrap us up here.
All right, well, thank you very much. Thanks for having me back. So what was I asked to do? I was asked to do an independent review of 2 documents. One is a human grizzly bear conflict management strategy, and the second document is a bear risk assessment for Mount Sprott and Rainbow Mountain area. And I was asked to take a look at these 2 documents and provide an independent review of them, my opinion on them. So to begin myself out with this work, what I did is I looked back and I said, oh, we've got a land resource management plan, or a regional land use plan. And this land use plan has been reviewed and agreed on by a number of people, including the resort municipality of Whistler or a number of groups, recreationalists, both motorized and non-motorized, First Nations, other stakeholders, cabinet, it's approved by cabinet and government. So this is it. When I looked at this land resource management plan, I'm just going to shorten some of the goals, but it has 5 goals that are related to grizzly bears. And the first is to achieve and maintain a viable status for each of the 4 grizzly bear population units that are in the planned area. So these are the 4 threatened units that we've been talking about, to conserve critical bear habitat, including movement corridors for bears, to reduce mortality of bears due to human-bear interactions, to reduce incidence of grizzly bear mortality within and displacement from critical habitats. And the last one, the 5th one, reduce incidence of displacement of grizzly bears due to recreational activities. So that's the plan, and it's in place, and it's been agreed upon by everybody. When I took a look at these documents, there really was no mention of the plan in there. And it really was, what it was like these trails were set to go ahead. How do we now mitigate for them? Rather than, when you're going to put in new trailing and planning networks, what you really need to think of first is, do these trails need to go in here? Do we need more trails? And if the answer is yes, do we need them in this area? What are these critical habitat types that are going in there? That's what we need to look at and address. Whereas when I read the documents, they came about as, well, this is a go-ahead, and therefore, how do we mitigate? And that shouldn't be how to do it. The second thing we need to do is, if we want to do this and maintain a viable status, allow these populations to grow, to secure them, right? Then we really need to take a look at the biology of the bears in this area. And when I took a look at the reports, these are, as Steve was saying, and he showed you his excellent research and the maps of these bears, there was none of that research in the report. So there was no, these are the critical habitat types, how do we plan around them, right? It was very people-centered. So 2 of the trails, for example, one called Beverly Gap Site, it says, well, it's ringed with huckleberries, which is a critical food, like Steve said, in the fall. So we know we have a high incidence of, there's going to be bear-human encounters there. One of the things that we can look at doing is not placing a campground there at all. Try to pick somewhere that's much less quality habitat than that. Okay, but how the ratings worked out in this report is that it rated really low hazard, because it was people-centered and it wasn't yet open. Okay, so a hazard assessment, the base of all hazard assessments is really the bears themselves. What is the biology of the bear, and what is the probability of a bear being there? Right? And how important is this habitat to a bear? That's what we need to base our hazard assessments on, so that we can properly plan around these and our trails for these. So we want to proactively manage for this. It's hard. We start to get into a hard situation when we're reacting all the time, when we're trying to catch up with the problems that are going on. What we can do is we can proactively manage. When we proactively manage, we're trying to get rid of those problems before they've even happened. We always know there's going to be different things. These are bears, right? They're going to be out during the day. They're not always going to be out at dawn and dusk. They're going to be doing all these other things that they're doing, right? But you have to understand something. This is their home. So imagine sitting in your living room, watching TV, and someone comes through. I'm just going to go through here now. Oh, I'm sorry, you're in my way. I'm just going to pick you up and move you somewhere else, right? That's not cool. This is the bear's habitat. And when we put these stresses on them, like I was saying, this energy out, right? And the stress that goes on them that they already have to account for, when we add that to it, that's just another cumulative impact for that animal, because they just can't go, well, let's go to the chalet after and we'll grab a thing of fries, right? And they have to go try to find that high quality food to replace that. So it's really important to try to pre-plan. Okay, so that's the preamble on that. So then I was asked for, okay, what was done right? Well, I think it's really great that after I reviewed this report that and then presented to council, that they went back and said, oh, okay, right, let's take a look at this. Let's take a look at this plan, and how can we make this more bear-centered? And this is, and so another biologist, a bear biologist who specializes in hazard assessments and management plans, came in and updated this. And as a result of that, there are some things that came out of that: trail closures during certain times, recommendations on trails that aren't in there to go into other areas. So that's very positive, and I really, really applaud that. I think that that's really great. So what we want to take away from that part of it, though, when we do these types of things, is to keep in mind the bear biology so that we don't have to react. We don't want to react to these situations. We want to proactively manage them. So I was asked, looking into the future, best practices. What is the best practice? Well, the best practice is to first off ask ourselves, is this the best place for this to be occurring? If this is what our goals are, and we've agreed on them, to grow these populations back, to conserve critical habitat, is this the best place for bears? What's going on in the area west of Whistler is a spillover of recreational activities. So if you think about this and you go back, and I want to bring this back to the pictures Johnny showed of those females, those family groups that were killed as entire family groups. Okay, we have already at some point in our history decided that Whistler is for recreation. That's where it's going, that's where the trails are going, that's where the skiing's going. And if you look at that Garibaldi pit unit, the population estimate was 2 bears. Okay, well, that's not a population. So we've already decided that this is our sacrifice area. Do we want to sacrifice the Crown land west of Whistler? You know, do we want to bring back these threatened populations? Do we want to minimize our impact? Do we want to work with bears? Keep our dogs on leash if this is what we're going to do? Right? These questions need to be asked. They need to be asked because bears don't have the option to go to Safeway. They don't have their house out there. That's it, the landscape that we're in, right? So we need to respect bears, understand it, look into where you're going, see what the bears are doing in that area, and how can you best mitigate that? Oh, I can keep my dog on leash. Oh, look, that trail actually goes up through a really good huckleberry patch. Maybe we won't take that one because the bears are up there using it. Right? So just think about it. Think about bears, where they are on the land base and what they've already gone through and what they've sacrificed, and what can we do? Best management practices. We can do it before we put the trails in, so we're not running and being reactive. And we can do it by looking at where we're going and what's happening and what impact that's going to have on the bear population. So I think with that, I'll take a quick look at my notes, but yes, my last line is just please remember that bears live there and we are the visitors. But thank you very much for listening today.
Thank you, Lana. That was a good look forward to that little end component. You had actions for us as individuals and actions for us as communities, and you know, whether those communities are our geographic centers or whether they're the communities of the whether it's other recreationalists that share our passions. It feels like we have lots of opportunity to kind of think about these things more deeply, and again, I hope for everybody on the webinar that we've at least started to share some ideas, build some collective understanding from the bear perspective. We knew we weren't going to get into any of the nuances around the detail of this, but hopefully we've provided a baseline from which we can have ongoing dialogue in all the communities through the Sea to Sky and other communities that are facing the same challenges around how to balance out all the different things that we're trying to maintain on the landscape. So I just wanted to say thank you to all of our speakers this evening, Chief Ian Campbell, Steve Rochetta, Lana and Melanie. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge. We're really lucky here to have you guys interested, engaged, and willing to share with people. And hopefully there's groups that will increasingly be coming to you and asking for input as they're kind of thinking of ideas for what they want for future projects. And Johnny and Coast to Cascades Grizzly Bear Initiative, I wanted to say thank you to you guys as co-hosts for this evening. I hope that we can all stay connected. We did have a quick last poll here. If anybody wants to stay connected to Coast to Cascades or Aware, just hit the subscribe there, and we'll fire you onto our e-newsletters, so you don't even need to go sign up on a website. But we do hope that that we've pushed the conversation along in terms of what coexistence looks like. As I said, we will be sending out a follow-up email that will include some links to further information. We will include a video recording of this webinar. We'll also have the video recording of the previous webinar, which, as Lana mentioned, was a lot more about grizzly bear biology and habitat and those kinds of things. So do please feel free to watch both of those. Again, the hope is that they're a resource that we can all share with our collective groups and friends and family. Obviously, the more we know, the more we can think about how we interact with grizzly bears as an icon of the wild that is unfortunately threatened in this area, and that there are great strides are being made to try to recover. So again, we thank you for your time this evening, and look forward to seeing you sometime soon at hopefully another one of these great speaker events. So thank you and have a wonderful evening.